welcome to another episode of TechUnit, where we dive into the raw, unfiltered world of technology, innovation, and the incredible people driving the change. I'm Usher, and today we're going to explore how technology is rewriting the safety playbook from reactive to predictive. Joining me is Salia. She's a results-driven EHS, environment health safety leader with over a decade of experience protecting people, product, and the planet across some of the most complex industrial environments. She currently leads the EHS department for PepsiCo EMEA region, and previously she was working at the driving the overall national safety strategy at Unilever Pakistan. Salia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here and picking up a very important topic, which we actually do need to talk more about when it comes to different industries and different scopes that we're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been more recently been interacting with a lot of safety specialists, and I found that all of them have a certain passion around, how to work with safety, how to keep people safe. And that was something very refreshing, very nice to look at. Usually when you talk to people, they're like, just normal about their jobs. But I really found whoever I met, especially you and a few other people as well, everybody talks about safety so passionately. So it was very, energizing and refreshing for me to experience that as well. So that's been good. All right.
I'm just saying that definitely it is something which has to be done with passion, because if it is not done with passion and if it's just about, compliance, tick in the box, then it's automatically going to result into certain negligences and non-conformances. So usually, just like doctors, you will see a lot of safety people,
Yeah,
they're also
that's
very,
true.
very passionate about
That's
what they
true.
do. Because it
Uh,
also gives them a sense of satisfaction that whatever we are doing is trying to save people's life and trying to save livelihoods. So that is why I think you're meeting people who are very, very passionate.
yeah, that's true. No, absolutely. Doctors share the same passion usually. So yeah, I think when it comes to human life, generally, that's the major thing that's driving, these kind of careers and these kind of job options and everything. So yeah, that's true. Kind of circling back on the same. So what was your first moment in your early career that kind of made you realize that, hey, safety is just not theory? It's a matter of life and death, or it could be a potentially a matter of life and death.
For me, Ashur, I think it was very, very personal, because as a part of my education as well, I studied health and safety. And trust me, when you say that it is more theoretical for people, it was more theoretical for me as well. It was just like one of the courses you're studying and you're getting to know about all the systems. But it got personal for me because I did actually lose my friend in a driving accident who was unfortunately not wearing a seatbelt. And this was exactly the time when I was working for an organization which had very, very strong safety systems. And that was the time when I started to reflect that whatever we're doing is not just keeping into consideration that it's a high risk organization and that is why they require safety. I figured it is something it has to be done everywhere, wherever we do,
Right.
wherever we are, which organization we're working for. So it was very early in my career, though, right after we graduated. But I think the right time for me to also understand the importance of this particular area and this particular scope, and hence that is where my
Right.
passion then.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, something as simple as tightening a seatbelt could, cost you a life or save your life. So, that really tells you that how important even the minor things could be. All right. So, how do you typically break down between your reactive and predictive safety in a simple everyday language, if you could explain for the viewers?
Okay, so if we have to explain it to people just in very simple language, reactive safety is like waiting for an accident to happen and before you take any action. It focuses on fixing the problems, after they have occurred, after you have done the investigation or after the incident has taken place. Whereas predictive is the one where you're using analytics, data, information, sensors to identify a potential risk. It's just like weather forecast that warns you about a particular weather condition or storm in advance, and then you prepare accordingly. So
Okay.
predictive safety is also in the same way, helping you identify things that can happen and things that can go wrong. In safety language, we call these leading and lagging indicators. I remember talking about it as well, where leading
Yeah.
are the ones which are more active and predictive, and lagging are the ones which are more reactive.
Okay. So does this shift happen in the last few years, or it's always been kind of seen in that way, where you see leading, lagging, or does this shift has happened more towards predictive, with the new technology and everything, which we're going to talk about shortly as well? has come in?
So I think if you go back in the 1800s, you must have seen a lot of major accidents that happen. I won't talk about the incidents from a very far place, but one that happened in our neighboring industry, the Bhopal incident, where a lot
Mm.
of things went wrong and that particular incident took place. And that's when all the organizations, they stood up, safety organizations, they stood up and they tried to figure out that what actually went wrong. But this entire shift has taken much longer than it should have. It's been now a lot of decades, and people are still not understanding the need for doing this. There are still organizations who are very reactive, and there are still organizations who have started working on a more, leading indicator approach, but still they're not very strong with it. And honestly, if I tell you, the challenge that they are facing is too much data that they have, too much information that they have. They're just unable to figure out that how do they
Right.
put that data into the right use. So yeah, it's a
Okay.
cultural shift. It has taken many centuries now.
Okay. So yeah, so next question is exactly on that. So after years of investigating incidents, there's a lot of data that comes in. What are some of the patterns that you consistently see, that traditional audits or manual site reporting or mechanisms like these would generally miss out?
Okay, so traditional audits are usually focusing on frameworks and processes that a safety
Okay.
system defines. I think something which everybody is missing out on the human side, the people side. That is where usually in an audit you would not find out what sort of a communication is happening with the people on the floor or people in the field. What are the cultural challenges? They might have a perfect process in place and they might have a perfect, reporting in place. But are people really connected with those processes? That's something which comes out to be a big barrier. Usually, when we are investigating, we keep a rule of thumb that after any investigation, we have to identify three gaps. One is the process gap, one is the system gap, and third,
Okay.
which is very important, is the people side. Many reactive organizations focus on the people side first, but then that is more driven by accountability. They want to focus on who did it wrong or who messed it up, and then they want to jump
Hmm.
onto the account. So traditional auditing systems, while they're excellent when it comes to process health check, we need to have more systems in place to identify behavioral issues and behavioral challenges and what is happening on the people side of.
Okay, that's interesting. You work with some of the world's strictest, safety standards. So where do you think all of these frameworks or existing frameworks at times struggle to keep pace with the way modern risk is now also evolving, right? So you used to use different set of tools, now you use a different set of tools. And environments are completely changing. Have then these, safety standards been keeping up? They've been lagging a little. If they have been lagging a little, where do you think they are basically struggling in?
Okay, you started off by saying that worked for the stricter safety standards organizations. I will not talk about them. They're very few
Okay.
in numbers, and they are updating themselves from a process safety approach or a process-based approach to a risk-based approach. However, for traditional setups, I think the struggle is very different because they're working on different complex supply chains and rapid technological changes. The
Okay.
old frameworks in industries where they were only focusing on regulation or only focusing on compliance, they would forget the fact that lack of agility in your supply chain and lack of identifying or evolving risk can actually result into an incident as well. For instance, when we talk about a manufacturing side, in a manufacturing side, it's a VUCA world. There are things changing on a day-to-day basis. And if you're not going to change your safety framework according to the changing supply chain, and you're going to stick to those traditional safety frameworks only, then it's just going to be a push that you're going to give to your people, and it's just going to be a process that you're going to ask your employees to follow, and it's not going to be an easy one because they've started working in a different way. I think that's the struggle that is there with modern risk. Modern risk is focusing more on risk prediction. One is risk
Okay.
assessment. When you know something is wrong, you go and you figure it out. The other part is risk prediction. There is a framework by the name of world class manufacturing that teaches you that, where you have to identify what can go wrong. If a person is standing next to a conveyor, what will go wrong? What is it
Right.
that the person, maybe the conveyor is in the perfect condition, but what if he decides to put his hand somewhere on one of the
Right.
pinch points?
Right.
That's something which is really important. And that's what modern, the traditional organizations are probably lacking when it comes to identifying modern risk.
Right. Or what if he just decides to climb on the conveyor belt and pick something up there while it's running? So
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, it's hard to predict human behavior. So now prediction is, or predicting behavior or predicting scenarios, all of that comes from data. Now, the more the data you capture, then you have to organize that data, and then C, you have to kind of evaluate, looking all of those patterns at what's really going on. And how do you think technology, more recently, you have the CCTV cameras are now fairly common across everywhere. And then you have this computer vision technology and real-time alerts. How do you think that can really help in organizations, catching up to this modern race, to help in evaluation of different type of patterns emerging? And then B, how do you really explain it? So let's say if you have to, first, it's a question of whether it's helpful or not. Let's answer that. And then B, let's say if you're deploying it in a certain organization, how do you guys, as safety leaders, explain to the frontline workers that, hey, how this would eventually help them out?
Okay, so I'll answer the first part first, because we spoke about that, there's a lot of data that is there. Now, think of an organization where, let's say, 1,500 people are working. So 1,500 people are coming from 1,500 backgrounds. They
Right.
have a different mindset. They all operate in a different way. They all might be coming to work with a lot of baggage. Some might be relaxed. Some might have a different environment or setup that they're working in. When you actually go to the floor and you start observing one person for the entire day, you would know that every person might make a certain mistake every day.
Right.
And then if you start observing these 1,500 people, maybe you have 1,500 alerts for 1,500 people in a single day. That's exactly the amount of data that is being received by a good safety organization or a safety driven organization. This is such a huge amount of data, and usually we say these are probably some sort of unsafe conditions or unsafe acts,
Yeah.
sometimes even near misses that are being captured. Now, with this huge amount of data, it is very, very difficult for the organizations to actually analyze the data and pick up the areas which are of bigger concern. When we say bigger concerns, things which have a higher probability of happening, which most of the people are doing wrong, or things which have a higher severity, which can result into a major incident, a
Right.
significant, an amputation, or let's say even a fatality.
Right.
So this set of data and this set of information is impossible for people to actually sit down and analyze and identify. And that is where technology plays its part. That is where things like AI, using CCTV, especially, utilizing CCTV to capture these, because it's not for 1,500 people, you cannot have one or two people evaluating them. Or let's say, even if you have 10 people evaluating it, you cannot capture everything. So utilizing these sorts of technology tools that are there becomes very, very important. And even more important is that how you're reading this information, how you're building on to this information. Now, coming to the second part is that once you have done the analysis, how are you communicating it to your frontline? Because that's the more trickier part. There are organizations who would focus on, like we spoke about, accountability. But can they hold their 1,500 people? Let's say even 100 of them do something wrong. Can they hold 100 people accountable in a single day? They cannot.
Right.
They have to
Yeah.
build that culture of care and culture of trust, and let them know that whatever we are doing is to help you and to protect your livelihood, and to help them understand that this is aiding for their own safety, instead of using this particular information and telling them that, you are the one who did something wrong. Today I'm going to give you a warning. Tomorrow you're going to be fired and you're going to be terminated. This way we will end up firing the entire organization one day. So that's not the approach that we should be taking. And to build onto this culture of care and to build onto this culture of trust, it's very, very important to talk to these frontline people, to talk to our field people, and make them understand the purpose of doing this. I'll give you a very quick example. Now, in the new vehicles, they have this proximity sensor coming in, and
Yeah.
the reverse camera coming in, and the blind spot alert that is coming in. And this is what customers are actually preferring because they've understood the need for it. I mean, we would now not prefer buying a vehicle which does
Yeah.
not include all the sensors and technology that is there, because we've understood the need for that, how it has made our lives easier. It's exactly the same way for the frontline. For the frontline, it's might going to take a little longer time, in explaining it to them, that's because they've never gotten that exposure of understanding how these things and these tools can help them or aid them. But once they do, they actually partner with you, they actually support you, and they actually help you develop further on this particular agendas. We have seen in organizations that usually frontline is now the one coming up with such initiatives and such agendas, and that's how it has helped us. I hope I was able to
No, no,
answer your.
absolutely. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what you're saying really is that, because I know I asked two different questions. The one was that how technology can help, definitely help. And the reason it can help is there's large amounts of data, different varying patterns. And that's where AI, ML, and machine learning and all these solutions really come into play. It helps us filter through identifying that, hey, what's super important? What are the top three things that I really have to go for that are happening in my particular site? And I can go and target them and hit them and kind of resolve them. The other is really making all of these frontline workers as your partners in the sense that, hey, at the end of the day, whatever trouble that I'm taking to help resolve this is for your own benefit. And these are
Exactly,
the
exactly.
and yeah, and these are the reasons, and these are the reasons we do it. We don't do it for monitoring productivities and then whether how much, smoke break you had. It's more really towards making sure that you get home back safe to your families and you're able to come to work the other day.
Yes,
So those
yes.
kind of scenarios.
And
So
especially
absolutely.
when they talk about these frontline workers, there are people who are not from a very well-off background, and there are people who are most of the times they're the bread owners of their families. And imagine if one person comes across a
Yeah.
particular incident, it's the entire household that gets disturbed. Now,
Yeah.
also think of a scenario where this person is thinking, oh, there's a camera installed on top of me, and they're monitoring my behavior, and I'm going to get fired if I do something wrong. The amount of stress he's going to have while doing that particular job, and then eventually that stress is going to translate into a different kind of incident.
Yeah.
So this is also another reason for them to be comfortable, for them to be relaxed in a particular environment where they do have a camera, and to help them understand that this particular camera is only to generate alerts, it is only to generate a warning for you so that you don't do anything wrong or you don't
Right.
mess it up. So
Right.
that's how it becomes very, very important. We're linking it to livelihood, but it is linked to livelihood.
Which of these the systems give you different, how do I put it, different signals, right? So they could give you behavioral signals, they can give you environment ones, equipment health, history. Which of these signals, in your experience, you found that are the strongest early warnings of danger, right? So, I mean, I'm familiar with the Heinrich triangle, the number of UAUCs
Yeah.
and all of those incidents and near misses being increased. But within that specific, let's say if you go into further categories, which are the most strongest early warnings, signs of dangers you've seen?
The ones at the bottom of the pyramid. You work on
Okay.
that. That's the behavioral signals. And
Right.
why is that important? Because you're working on changing the behaviors of the workers, helping them explain things like, don't take shortcuts, do not unfollow a safety protocol, or go for an option where maybe you will be able to manage your work in a different way, which is not the compliant way. However, I do also believe that the equipment health goes hand in hand with behavioral part as well. That's
Okay.
because if a person is doing everything right, but the equipment itself is not functioning properly, it is eventually going to result into an incident as well. You see a lot of vibrations happening on a particular machine, and the person is unable to detect that, can result into a fire as well. So both behavioral and equipment health will go hand in hand. Environment comes later. Environment is a result of behavior and equipment health, because it's going to be more of a reactive approach if we start looking at environment at the first phase, because it takes a lot of time to deteriorate environment. It's not going to give you an early signal. However, these two are what is actually going to help you identify early signs of warning and early signs of danger. So a person can do everything right. Nowadays we are living in a world where in a lot of machines and processes we do not even require people. They're
Yeah.
running on their own. So in such cases, it's very, very important that the machine or the equipment is operating in the right way, in the best optimum way for which it was particularly designed.
So equipment health is equally, if not more or less, as important as behavioral safety or environmental safety and all of those things. So yeah, that's
And
that's
that's
true.
why I said
So
focusing on bottom of the pyramid, because in the
Right.
bottom of the pyramid you have unsafe acts which are linked with behavior, and then there are unsafe conditions which are linked with the equipment.
I know we talked a little about, AI surveillance and then making sure that because as more of this grows, there's a huge issue in organizations around privacy and trust. And, even in US, there have been several laws that have been passed that, hey, you cannot record workers or you cannot around their privacy laws and within Pakistan as well. But, generally around those sites. So how do you address those particular factors? I know in some organizations, it would be very simple, but in major, bigger organizations, especially in the US, Europe region, where you have GDPR and all those compliances as well, it's becoming a real hot topic, right? So even they're not even allowing to take you screenshots of vehicle license number plates or ensuring that that data does not go to the cloud. It stays within that specialized camera for all of these things. So how has your experience been kind of addressing concerns around privacy and trust?
I think it's a very important question, and I would say that instead of being more organization driven, it's more country driven, depending on the regulation that particular country has and the rights it has given to its people for privacy, which is a good thing in itself. But however, if we still want to develop ourselves in safety tech innovation, the most important thing is how we're building the trust of foundation of this particular innovation, and how we're letting people know the importance of this particular safety innovation that we want to do. Workers do have a concern with AI surveillance, but as we already discussed, it's important for the workers to know what is the use of this particular information. How to overcome that is by building on more guardrails around the systems that we have developed. And I
Mm.
think keeping in consideration more IT security or cyber security guidelines, the fear that people generally have is how this information is going to be used.
Be
Is it
used.
going to be
Yeah.
used against us? That's the first part, and that is where organizations have to play their part in helping them understand that how the information is going to be used. The other part is, let's say the organization is doing its best part, but for those who are developing these particular systems, how are they ensuring that this information is not going to be misused
Right.
or is going to be shared, elsewhere? I am not a software person, but I know for a fact that what are the IT security guardrails around the particular information that we have? How long is it protected? Who is it protected from? How do you make sure that it's going to stay protected for many, many years? It's not like the information is protected now, but even in future, it's going to be somewhere which is staying between the organization and the responsible people who are taking care of it. So that's important. And to further take it to the organization, that's one thing which we should be working on. I know for a fact that AI itself now is evolving a lot, and there are many AI security companies that have now jumped in and they're trying to work on it. But we as an organization, when we are taking our particular tool or product to an organization, we have to utilize that information. We have to utilize those standard and develop our own standard and guideline that is there.
So maybe something like having, responsible AI standards very similar to how we have ISO for quality or ISO for security and SOC 2 compliances. So
Yeah.
maybe have some sort of those
Yes, I think
certifications or something.
having
Yeah.
standards like ISO would really help, and having
Yeah.
standards for IT security would really help.
And
Yeah.
maybe making them specific around capture, AI usage or data captures and all of those things. So yeah,
Exactly,
absolutely.
exactly. And it would even get better if we tell them it's not just that we have a standard in place. It's a standard which is probably getting audited, getting governed. Somebody is looking at the standard, how it is being implemented as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's also very important.
So, what are your thoughts on the fact that, let's say, if AI detects imminent danger faster than humans, should they have the authority to automatically intervene or not? Think Skynet.
I'll I'll give you an example before I answer this, and I think my example would be able to answer this question. I'm not sure if you're aware of it that MG actually introduced a particular auto braking mechanism in its vehicles back in
Yes.
2023 and 2024. Now, what happens in a country like Pakistan that you gave all the authority to the vehicle sensor to actually stop the car in case it detects a threat, but do all other cars around it have the same
Same way.
technology in place? So, what would happen if MG suddenly stops? Another vehicle from the back can come and collide with this particular vehicle. So,
Yeah,
I
that's
think.
true.
I think this is the case where we will have to do risk assessment on the basis of each scenario separately. There are cases in which you can give complete autonomy to the AI system, where it can immediately, come in and stop that incident from happening. But in some cases, you will have to still keep human over there or keep people over there to immediately pick whether it's going to result into a bigger threat or not. For instance, suddenly turning off a part of a machinery might result into a bigger incident itself. So this is where AI and humans, and it's not like we're going to end human jobs. This is where both have to work together, and they will both
Yeah.
have to assess the risk of each and every scenario and utilize it accordingly. And humans can
Right.
continue to work on these different technology tools that are there. And I think with machine learning, automatically over a period, machines have started to learn certain scenarios as well. But you can't fix every scenario to every particular situation. It depends on where you are, who you are operating with, what is the environment around you. A lot of factors are there when you're looking at a risk assessment. So yeah, I would not say that AI would completely replace the
Got it.
human side.
Yeah, I agree. So if it's a machine working environment, maybe then yes. So everything around that machine is also machine, and if something is about to happen or something, then yeah, then it
Yes.
probably makes sense that. But if there are humans involved, there are other forklifts involved, whatever different kind of machinery involved or different people involved there, then yes, then in leaving up that entire decision to a machine, maybe not the best of ideas. So okay. So coming to, talking about safety from an ROI perspective, right? So because at the end of the day, it's also an expense on how much advanced safety or how much that we put towards it. So how do we, when you're communicating with, let's say, executive leadership, how do you shift the narrative from generally, I mean, depends organization to organization, but generally, let's say the shift narrative from let's say safety is a cost to really safety is a performance and risk management advantage for you for an organization in the long run.
Okay, now with the increasing focus on safety standards, learning from the incidents that are happening all across, there are some responsible organizations which do not start off their conversation with cost. But if it comes to it, where an organization has to start talking about, cost of doing safety, they should also be given a perspective of the hidden cost of not doing safety.
Right.
Because usually if you do not adopt to safety tools and safety systems that are there, eventually you're going to lag behind in completely or properly implementing a safety framework or a safety system that is there. When we're talking about hidden cost, we generally don't realize, but there are many, many, many aspects of it. Starting from the medical attention that you need to give to an injured person, let's say it's an injured person, to the lawsuit you're going to probably handle, to the cost of hiring a different person in his particular place. So there are multiple costs that get associated with it. Sometimes it could even result into your product recall. Let's say it has been contaminated. It's a huge cost that is there.
Hmm.
So it's not just, although ideally it should be we trying to explain it to them that it's about people and we value them the most and they are who is actually running your organization. But still, if it ever comes to some traditional organizations who do not understand it and who consider safety as a cost, we should be reflecting more on the hidden cost that is there. Now, with that being said, I think it's also very important to understand that we're not doing safety and operations separately. We have to
Right.
do safe operations. So we should ideally be talking about doing safe operations instead of doing safety and operations separately. It's just like producing a quality product. We don't say we are going to do production as well as we are going to do quality. That is eventually going to result into, I would say, a bad quality product at the end of the day. It's the same way how we look at safety and production. And usually, when you have to go to the executive leadership team and you have to explain it to them, our first conversation should not be cost or expense. Our first conversation should be how this program is actually going to help you protect your people and how this program or tool is actually going to help you do better risk assessment and better risk management. That should be the selling point. And if they understand this, then I think it's a lifetime understanding that is there.
How do you think? I mean, it's not ROI as well, but maybe as workplaces and having these superior safety performance systems and digitized systems, maybe they can become a competitive differentiator in retaining talent, in retaining and building trust with their employees. If like you said that early on, if you make them as partners that, hey, we're doing this for you, that particular talent is concerned about safety and they see how there's a certain organization that's really moving forward from in this perspective, though I would love to stay here and keep working here. Maybe that becomes a competitor advantage as well in the long run.
Ashir, I think very rightly said, and definitely it's very, very important now with the type of people who have started to join the organization with the newer generations. They're very aware and they know
Right.
what's important, and they have started to understand that what is something which is going to protect their own well-being. And especially for these generations, because in the older generation, it was more about, we have to work, we have to build a career, we have to make money. But these newer generations, since they're more aware, they're focusing on themselves before anything else. And when they're focusing on themselves, yes, they do keep into consideration what organization they're targeting and what is the culture and what is the system that is there in that particular organization. Now, if I know for a fact there is a particular organization with where there are accidents happening every other day, I would not want to join it, even if they're giving
Yeah.
me a higher better pay package. So for talent retention and for talent attraction, in both cases, it is important to have a very, very good safety system in place. It gives them a sense of security when they come to your organization and they're working over there, or when they're working in your industry. And that becomes one of the very important parameters for them to retain as well. Then continue to work with you and continue to put in effort as much as you are putting effort in them. So again, there is a trust element to this as well.
Right.
And I think this is something which is going to bring excellence when it comes to the integrity of any industry.
I'm sure with all of this data coming in, the workplace becoming more and more safe every day, it eventually helps reducing insurance premiums as well, right? So that's another added
Definitely.
advantage, and the
Yeah.
CFO gets
And
happy in
that's a
that
big
case.
and that's a big added advantage if you are talking about organizations that have setups in the developed, because
Yeah,
developing are the ones who continue to focus on it. But in developed markets, insurance premiums are huge. I
huge.
mean,
Yeah.
really going to help them.
Right. As we close, what do you think is the one biggest non-negotiable step for, EHS leaders to start shifting from reactive safety to proactive predictive safety? And what would be that one big thing be?
This is an easy one, as we spoke about in our initial conversation, focusing on leading indicators and
Leading indicators.
using those leading indicators to actually mitigate areas which are of critical and high risk first, and then eventually moving towards area which might be of, medium and low risk. It's very,
Okay.
very important to address issues which have a bigger impact and issues which have a higher probability of happening. But this all has to be done on the basis of the data only, and the data has to be as best as possible. It
Right.
cannot be the data that you gather by the way or by chance. You have to try to gather as much leading indicators as possible, and for that we can not just solely depend on the past incidents that have happened, but also to the information now that you can gather, and especially through technologies. And you spoke about in a previous question utilizing your CCTV cameras, utilizing the informations that you're getting from different sensors or different systems and processes that you have implemented. So we should be looking at all of it together and then work on it. Only then we will be able to create a proactive safety culture rather than a reactive one. And that's the advice for all other EHS people who are out there.
I think this was a wonderful conversation, Sanya. Really, thank you for joining us today. Your overall perspective and, like I said, your passion really spoke. And I love that thing about safety people and kind of saying that again as well. But yeah, so really, thank you for joining us today. It was wonderful talking to you, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Asher. And I would also say that there is now a certain passion that I see in you and what your organization is also doing. And I think while you're looking forward to pursuing it with other other organization, start every conversation with the same passion that you have there, and it should be focused more on, how you want to protect the people and how you want to
Yes.
do this for the better livelihoods of the people working in different setups and different organizations, whichever industry they are in. So once
Right.
you start the conversation with that, automatically it becomes a conversation in your favor.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay.
best of luck
Thank you.
with whatever you guys are doing.
All right. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.